we've all been in that situation where we've seen these images and maybe they're online, maybe they're in print, and they just pop and we're like, wow, how is it so sharp? And customers have been asking us saying, Gavin, you guys need to make a collection of sharpening tools that takes the little bits and pieces that we have in sharpening tools from other collections and expands on it. And we listened. Sharpest is an action pack for Photoshop dedicated to sharpening. And the cool thing about it is, whatever you're doing, whether it's portraits or landscapes or wide or close, or whether you're putting a tiny image on people's mobile screens, you can quickly choose from the actions the kind of sharpening you want. Play around with it, mask it, adjust it, make it exactly how you want, make it that perfect final step, and then go to print, go to web, go to presentation, and get that look every time. Just right is the problem. Where you're sharpening, how you're sharpening, the quantity you're sharpening. Sometimes you're in close, sometimes you're far. Sometimes you're thinking about skin and how the texture works. Sometimes you're dealing with architecture or a landscape and you want to bring out the hardness of stone. And I think understanding how we can apply this in sharpening and having tools that allow us to do it quickly. We use sharpening tools like high pass and frequency separation or smart sharpen or unsharp mask for all these different things. The beauty of Sharpest is that it makes all those easy. So you can kind of go through, just pick the action that you need for the type of image you're working on. You can mask it for the type of image you're working on. There's auto masking tools for things like portraits to keep the skin under control. There's adjustments for smoothness where you're sharpening the image, but you can, because Sharpest makes sharpening so simple and so effective, I'm just gonna show you right now all the different actions, how to use them, and how to make your images perfectly Sharpest. Now, like any other actions, they're really easy to load. You can double click your action file and you'll see it open up here. If you go to the little 3 lines here in the actions panel, by the way, if you don't have that, you can find it from the actions option in the window menu to make sure you have that actions panel open. And you'll see when we double click them, they'll show up in there. You can rearrange your action sets. You can go down here and remove action sets if you're doing updates, and we can switch to button mode as well. You can also load actions from here if you're having trouble with the double click approach. You can go to the actions panel and load them right up. Let's switch to button mode because that's how we work. It switches to the nice color-coded actions, and you'll see I have lots of actions in here. But this first group right up here, all of this is the Sharpest collection, and the emphasis on everything here is sharpening. The beauty of sharpening in Photoshop over something like Camera Raw, like Capture One, something like that, is the options are far more. So what you're going to see as we go through is I'm going to show you the different actions real quickly here and how simply you can get different types of sharpening for different situations. And the beauty is you have total control over the output. So let's start with a basic sharpener like Visual Razor 20. This is a new and updated variant of kind of a classic sharpening action that I've been making for quite a while. And you'll see here, I'm going to zoom in on these because unlike some of our more dramatic Hollywood and color type effects, sharpening is all about the details in these actions. Now you can see here that I have a group. The action makes a neat vertical edited group, just like our other actions, and you can turn it on or off. Visual Razor is just a really versatile sharpening action. And you can see that there's a couple layers in here. There's a base sharpening layer, and there's also a bolder layer, which kind of increases the contrast, uses some high pass tools. What's happening in Visual Razor is versatility. And as you go through Sharpest, you're going to have a lot of tools that give you layers that mix different types of sharpening and allow you to do a lot more than you would just by going and tinkering around with unsharp mask or something like that. We've experimented and we've taken years of that experimentation and we've put it in to Sharpest. Basically, with most of the actions, you can simply take the main group and turn them up or down to increase or decrease that sharpness. Because sharpness is all about balance. It's not about getting as much as you can. It's about getting the right amount of sharpness for what you're doing. So you might use one type of sharpness for print, another type for web. If you're going to be viewing it small, you might want more sharpening for like Instagram to get that really impactful web look that makes you just go, wow, that's so sharp. We're going to show you how people are doing that as well. Visual Razor is just versatile. Feel free to adjust your opacities by clicking the group, as well as you can adjust individual layers within and really kind of have control to your heart's content. I'm going to delete this and we're just going to go through a couple more. That was Rocket Sharp. Let's look at Pin Sharpener. As the name implies, this is really fine detail sharpening. So as we see here, it's a little bit less dramatic than Rocket Sharp, but it really is doing work on the fine details, the leaves, the lines. And I'm actually going to turn this down a little bit. We're zoomed in over 100%, of course. And I'm doing these strong zoom ins just to make sure that on the screen you're really seeing what's possible here. But you can see how Pin Sharp is really affecting the fine details. Now bear in mind, you can stack and combine these as well. So I could run the Pin Sharp and then say, no, let's do the Rocket Sharp Pop. Rocket Sharp is another versatile sharpening, but it has a little more contrast to it than Visual Razor. And so you can see in Rocket Sharp, even though it's just a one layer, very simple, we have a lot of separation between lights and darks, and it's actually working to bring some contrast into the image while sharpening it. Bearing in mind that sharpening is essentially the adjusting of contrast between lines. The key to great sharpening is how and how much we do that. And so we can stack these as needed. And of course, you'll see that there's a mask being added to each group, and you can individually mask them out. So you can go to the brush tool and you can select a mask, and then you can mask in or out on a given area to remove it. So what's the rule in masking? White reveals, black conceals. You can see our mask is all white, but if we took the brush tool and then set it to black and painted black on the mask, you see we're erasing the mask in those areas. We're erasing the effect, rather. We're obscuring it with the mask. It's still there. If we reversed our color to white, we would paint it back. One quick shortcut for that is B to select the brush tool and D to reset swatches. And then you can switch back and forth with the X key between those swatches to really easily get control over that masking. We'll come back to masking a little bit more later, but you can see how we can go through and we can get a lot of quick, effective tools. Let's switch to another image. Any of these effects. Some images, a lot of different sharpening looks will look great. Some images, you might want more specific sharpening tools. There's some portrait tools in here too. So for example, let's go to the light and dark Smart Sharp. This is a fairly subtle effect that can be really good for portraits. And if you see, when we run this effect, we actually have Smart Sharpening. You can adjust the amount of the sharpening in those smart filters by just double clicking it and change the Smart Sharpening settings. So if I double click Smart Sharpen, it's going to bring up the palette, and these are non-destructive layers. So different actions within Sharpest, you're going to find favorites for different things. And if we zoom in here on her face, let's say we wanted to post this to web or to print it, we really want to bring out that detail. Now, light and dark sharp is fairly subtle, and this could be really good if you just want a little bit of sharpening. Maybe you're going to print and you want to make sure you're not adding noise. It's very controlled, and it's also separating the sharpness of the light and the dark channels, so you can change the way those lines kind of intersect, turn them up and down, and tinker with those. You can see, if we go in close, that one of these channels is affecting the dark, like we see here around the eyelashes, whereas the other channel is more directly affecting the sharpness of the highlights. And so we have independent control there if we want to be specific. And of course, if you wanted to turn it up and make it more, you could just click that Smart Sharpen and you could increase. So this one is pretty intelligent for things like that. But let's say we wanted to do something more, like maybe I want to post this to Instagram, right? And it looks great, and we got contrast and we got light, but let's do something like Instagram Web Sharp, because what are we dealing with mobile, with Facebook, with Instagram? And while our ultimate goal may be to go to print, a lot of people are seeing our images just like this. And so we've actually are designing tools specifically for Instagram and Web Sharp. And you'll see if I run this, even though it's small on the screen, it's a very strong edged effect. And you can see that really, see how what we've done there? It's really kind of giving that brightness, that sharpness, and there's control within here. This is actually a frequency separation effect. So you can go down into the layers of InstaSharp and you can adjust the L layer frequency layer to change the smoothness and intensity. So depending on what you're doing, you can make it more gritty by turning it down, or you can make it more smooth by turning it up, but you're still gaining sharpness. So even though there's an element of smoothness, like to the skin on this, for example, we're still gaining a lot of sharpness. We actually have an extra layer here, and you can see the mask on this is black. If we take and we mask this in with white, we're revealing it. So like, let's say we wanted to sharpen the eyes a little bit more than the default, and let's zoom in on that. You can see that we're adding extra sharpening to those eyes and eyelashes with this extra optional in the InstaSharp. And the bottom line is that we can get an image that is boldly, strongly sharpened, but still doesn't look ugly, that's not getting too gritty, that's not getting too grungy. So this can be great for anything really, but especially portraits and things like that, where you just really want that pop that you see on people's channels, on their images that they're posting online. This one is really dedicated to that. You're probably not going to want to use this one for print. Now let's go to something like Curvy Sharp. And if we run the Curvy Sharp, this is another frequency separation, and we don't need to get into all the ins and outs of frequency separation, but we use frequency separation a lot, which is essentially separating the details from the rest of the image. And on these frequency separations, you'll see we have the surface control, which is essentially a smoothing. So the texture detail has been placed on top separate from the smooth detail, and we can add or take away kind of the radius, kind of the subtlety of the sharpness, depending on whether we want a grungier look or a smoother skin look. On all of these, frequency or FS marked actions are going to have that frequency separation approach. The beauty of this is we have a clipping mask with a curves layer, and this is a little bit different because we can control the texture layer and make it more intense or less intense by simply adjusting the curve. So again, this is a very intelligent action. If we want to add more sharpness to shadows, we can actually just pull the shadows down on that curve. We can adjust the midtones up or down and add contrast, but normally you're going to want to leave this center one right where it is and only adjust this one and this one. So what that's going to do is we can change the degree of sharpness or softness just by changing the highlight and the shadow curve while leaving that center curve right there in the middle gray where it is. You can see we have control really quickly over the sharpness of this image with the Curve Sharp. So we can go fairly mild, or we can make a really strong S curve and get really intense, and then also combine that with the surface smoothing and all the things that go along with it. And of course, we can go to the top and turn it up or down. Now there's another one we should talk about before we go forward, and that's these gray ones. They're very important because whatever layer we have selected, we can switch. So we can switch to a paint in mask, which obscures everything, right? That basically switches us to brush mode. Now we have a black masked layer and the brush is pre-selected. We can of course adjust the size up here or by using the Alt or Option key to change the size, and we can simply brush in the sharpness wherever we want it on the image and go over it. And of course, then we could also adjust opacity to turn it down. So we can do that quickly and switch between a black mask, which is hidden, or a white mask, which is revealed. So the global mask, everything is revealed. You see it quickly turns it to white and reveals the effect across the entire image. The paint in mask goes to black and you paint in those details. Very quick. However, there's also another one, and that's the portrait auto masker, which is great for an image like this. Maybe we're getting ready to publish it or print it. Any action that we apply, and let's switch to the global mask. So everything's revealed. Maybe this is too much, right? We don't necessarily want all the sharpening on the clothes. It's defining the edges a little bit too boldly. What we can do is use the portrait auto masker. So make sure whatever action that you want to mask is selected, run the action, and it's going to automatically select the mask layer and run the cycle and mask it in a way that makes the skin more natural. You can see that there's kind of a middle gray mask here where it's letting some of the sharpness through on the skin, on other areas, on the light zones, but not as much. Watch what happens if we turn this mask off. You can see that the mask is global. With the mask, it's allowing those dark areas like the eyes to keep a lot of sharpness in those while keeping the skin very smooth and controlled. And of course, we still have all the settings of whatever action we're using. It doesn't change the effect. It simply auto masks it for a portrait type scenario. And of course, like any, we can click the mask and we could manually use that brush to mask in or out or whatever we wanted to do. Okay, let's swing up to another image and let's talk about getting a little bit more gritty, a little more high pass, and a little bit more detail for things like architecture and stuff like that. This is a nice image, but let's zoom in and let's run the Curvy Sharp. It's another frequency separation sharpening tool. This one generally not for portraits, unless maybe you're going for like a gritty black and white. It could be good for that. And you're going to see here as we go in that this gives a very strong effect. Again, it's a pretty simple high pass bass effect, but everything's done and ready for you. You can mask it just like we showed with the other ones, and you can of course adjust your opacity up and down. And so you can see that this is really powerful for bringing out kind of gritty, really rich texture in things. There's certainly times when you might use this on a portrait, but if you're going for a gentle look on a portrait, this is going to be intense. However, there's times when you could make this great on a portrait. So it just depends on what look. You can see even when we're zoomed out, right? An image like this, if we were going to Instagram, might look great with a Curvy Sharp instead of the Instagram Sharp, because it really is a strong edge, contrasty kind of look that works great for this architecture type scene. Now we could go and take the same thing on an image like this. It's more of a fitness image, and we could use a gentle sharpening like the pin sharpener, for example, and just bring out some fine detail. Or maybe we want something for this portrait that actually is a little more intense, and so we could actually go to the Curvy Sharp on this, which is going to make for a really strong effect that we can then of course adjust. So the beauty of all of these is it's a fairly simple set, but we've crafted these carefully so that you can quickly get to the type of sharpening that you need. And if you're going for something intense, if you're going for something soft, if you want to have control over smoothness and layers, you can use some of the frequency separation styles. Anything that you're trying to do, you can get that look. Remember that sharpening is something that you do at the end. And this is to avoid artifacts. The only thing I will generally add after sharpening is maybe some grain effects, which we can do in Lightroom and Capture One and Raw Editors. But we've also added a grain tool in here as well, just to add a subtle grain, which can really help give things kind of a nice smoothness. I put the Curvy Sharp on this. It looks pretty good out of the box just for making this thing really pop, right? If I wanted to maybe post this to my Facebook page or something like that, there's different ways that I could do this. I could also double click that curve, because it's a smart curve, and I could adjust the differences, how intense I wanted this in shadows versus highlights. The flatter I make this curve, the less intense the sharpening effect is going to be on the Curvy Sharp. So you can see we've taken sharpening from basically every different perspective. It's not just a bunch of different actions that just have different levels of sharp. We've used all the different techniques in sharpening to really give us control over it, masking, and then of course if we wanted to, we could finish up by adding some grain into here. And the grain is not that intense here, but you can see that we can give kind of a nice even filmic look. Again, I would do this very last, including after the sharpening. The beauty is also that everything is on these layers, so you can do all your image editing for whatever you're doing, and then you can just add a sharpening for web, right? And then maybe you want to go to print, and so you can just delete that group or hide it and add a sharpening for print. And you can use this final step to give the images exactly the feel that you're looking for whatever the job you're doing. Don't be afraid of the layer. The best retouching is done with layers, with controls, with masking, with adjusting things exactly where we need to. It harkens back to how we worked in the darkroom, and it gives us control over the final image. So when you're sharpening, just Sharpest, and then adjust it to get it the way you need. We thought about calling this like Sharpie, but that's a marker. So I think it's taken Sharp, but that seemed a little too generic. Sharpest is like alchemist, lumist. I thought about like samurai, but yeah, been done. So this is Sharpest. Like honestly, it's Sharpest. Take it or leave it. But seriously, take it.